Welcome to the Practice Podcast, conversations probing the nature of practice. I'm your host, Dave Fearon. This conversation with Karen Stevenson is a conversation with a true gardener. I didn't say professional gardener, hobby gardener. Karen is a gardener who does other things and does them well, I'm sure. But when you hear this conversation and hear her thoughts on how this little garden that she's built around her small house here in southeastern Connecticut, you know what I mean. You'll know what I mean. She thinks about what's growing out there, and she predicts how things could come out. In a sense, she says her whole garden is an experiment. So I think it's delightful to know how a person can find something like gardening that helps them cope with and even grow in other areas of their life. Maybe there's a gardener in all of us. Just some of us actually put it to work. But I think all of us have some delight in seeing something grow from a seed to fruition. There's something very basic about that feeling of seeing a seedling come out of the ground and suddenly start to become a plant, and then eventually what you'll hear Karen say is perhaps a sunflower, and food for the birds and food for the eye. So let me stop giving you what Karen said and let you listen to her say it herself. This is Karen Stevenson. This conversation happening on a Saturday afternoon, just a few minutes before the happy hour that Karen Stevenson and I have really, I think, probably attended about as well as anyone, maybe better. And it started, it's part of the purpose practice idea that was generated early in the pandemic. And so one way to get those of us who are interested and involved in practicing our purposes would come to these Saturday sessions. Now, during the pandemic, we weren't out playing like we could be today, Karen, or in your case, finishing off your garden, which we're going to talk about. But what did those happy hours mean to you?
Oh, what a great question, and what a tough one to answer. In the sense that I feel like it's hard to summarize how important they've been to me. It's a weekly reset. It's a weekly meeting of minds of people dedicated to practicing their purpose. And it's hard. It's hard sometimes to stay the course, as it were, without support. It's probably almost virtually impossible. And so this is a lifeline for that particular endeavor. So our calls are super important to me.
Yeah, and I'll second that motion. Each of us, particularly during those months when we couldn't be anywhere in person, had a friend deficit. I don't mean a deficit of friends, but acting in a friendly way with others. And so those hours that we would spend each Saturday from 4 to 5 gave us, well, we met people that I never would have met in the world.
Yeah,
Delaware and elsewhere, Pennsylvania. All I think we can credit to Brent Robinson and Jess Mann, who kind of made sure that all this worked technically and elsewise. But here's why I'm bringing up the happy hour, folks. It's not about the happy hour per se. It's about what Karen would be doing, and I stress doing, during all of our happy hours from early in the spring through probably, if we'll be doing something today, in a garden. Now, not just her garden, because you'd get this idea that the garden is somewhere over there, and then there's a lawn, and then there's a house. No, the garden is so surrounding the house because she's gardened pretty much every square inch of it that if you look at her house, you say, "Oh, there's a garden with a house in it."
That sounds ideal.
So I really want to know about this practice of yours, the gardening practice, because while you were doing that with us, we could tell it wasn't because you were distracted. It was because A, you only had so much sunlight or so much to do, and B, it seemed very soothing to you. And frankly, as an observer and during those conversations, it was soothing to me. I was like worrying about that loofah plant and wondering if you could grow peas on poles. So it was kind of fun. So what about the garden that is so important to you, Karen?
Yeah. So I've given this some thought because it really is like where did this all start for me? And I really have to go back to childhood. Really, like when I was little, when I was probably maybe 6 or 7. My dad was a gardener. So, we lived in just like a regular neighborhood. It wasn't like a farm or anything, but he was very much into landscaping and gardening. And I remember going out with him and like helping him to put the petunias in or whatever it was. But my interest was really limited. Like I liked to install them, like plant them in the ground. And I didn't want anything to do with maintenance, like at all. Like I was like, oh, it's all you now. Like I did the fun part. We got to pick which color goes where. That was great. So, and then, fast forward throughout life, and there were periods of time where I was living in apartments and I didn't have any kind of area to garden. And that actually, I think, made me realize that I missed it. Like I liked having those moments. And so when I finally bought my house, which was probably a little later than most people do in life, I had really wanted a place to put down roots, to settle. So there's
literally roots.
Yep. There's symbolism
gardening.
with that. When I bought this house, there was nothing. There was one hydrangea bush and a magnolia tree, and that was actually a magnolia bush. I trimmed it up into a tree to like make it less overwhelming. But that was it. There was nothing, and I started on this endeavor of the front yard, doing the landscaping just like my dad used to do. And so my dad passed about 14 years ago, and so I think a huge part of this is a connection to my dad. And and brings back so many memories. So that was the first phase, I guess you could say. And then started to wrap around the house. But that's how it began here. And when I first really started to get serious about it and really do it regularly.
In a number of the conversations that I recorded for the podcast, it usually leads to where did it all begin for you? And so that was eloquent, what you just said. But it made me think about my dad, who we had a sort of like a robe at the back of our little lawn, and he put in some stones that came from our original railroad station, and they collected, and then he would sketch at the kitchen table what he were, because it was a tiny patch. And I remember like looking over his shoulder, "Are you designing a kitchen?" "No, I'm kind of planning the garden." That was kind of the phrase, "I'm planning my garden." And he had, again, every inch pretty well figured out. And he also studied what would go next to which wouldn't try to eat its, fight away and eat its roots or something. So I get it. However, and I maybe dug a few holes with him, I had no interest in gardening. Now, today, I love watching gardening done. But my brother was completely hooked on it. And years later, when he finally had a place where he could put out a garden, he did the same thing. I remember seeing him sketch, and figuring out where everything went, and then working it. Unfortunately, he passed away from cancer in his early 50s. So that last garden that he planted was symbolic to me of how a human being can leave something. I suspect by now it's all covered over by whoever's using that house. But when I went to collect some of his things after he passed away, there was the garden, and it was looking great. And I think I talked to it. Now, let me just take that away from me and ask you what is kind of a silly question, but an important one. Do you talk to your garden, and does your garden speak to you?
Constantly. Constantly.
It's okay. We won't think you're crazy because I talked to my brother's garden. I've already got the ice broken on that.
Yeah, no, I'm not embarrassed to admit it. We're good. So no, it's a living entity. I mean, it is from the worms in the soil to the actual plants themselves. I think there's actually studies where if you sing to plants, they do better. I don't go that far, although I do tend to sing in the garden sometimes when I'm listening to music, but
okay,
not on purpose. But yeah, no, I think that there is a strangely deeper relationship somehow with well, not somehow, but with nature. And I was listening to one of your other episodes, and you talked about the practice of collaboration. And I was thinking about that because really it is a practice of collaboration with Mother Nature and with nature in general. And from the bunnies that come in and decide to eat something to the hurricanes we get where I'm tying everything up, desperately hoping it doesn't break, from the windstorms. It is, to our 70-degree November day today where I'm still harvesting tomatoes. Like it's this dance with nature. And so I think I do have a relationship with it. So whether it's through words or actions, absolutely.
I think it's a great image. I like picture. I had this weird picture in my head of you in the garden and Mother Nature also there. Both of you bending over, trying to pick out some tomatoes or something. But that close relationship with nature, and I know from knowing you now over how many months that we've been seeing each other here in these conversations, that you have a real you have a passion for the natural, and you want to be instrumental in the continuing of that little bunny. Take out the gun and shoot it. Or you also know that there are certain insects like butterflies and not so nice insects, but you still seem to respect them, even if they're chewing away on your precious pepper plant.
It is really hard sometimes to find that balance, but I've long, so it's interesting. You talked about planning out the garden earlier and how your dad and your brother, that was their style. My style is more, I want to grow that. Let's get all the things and then figure out how they're going to fit. And it's one big experiment. And so I don't know for a couple of years sometimes if I even like something, or if I want to keep it, or if I want to move it, or like it's an continually moving palette of items and just plans. It's constantly evolving. But with that comes the fact that I have learned not to set my hopes too much on any one thing being successful, because there's no guarantee. And so there are particular natural foes that do get in my way. So specifically, and I'm blanking on the name of it, but there's a bug that, or a worm or something that crawls inside of squash plants in the stem and kills off the whole plant. And people slice it open and they kill the thing. And I just planted more squash, so I figure they can eat some, and hopefully I'll get some squash out of the other. And it worked pretty well. We had a lot of.
They had their fill. They had their fill, and then you get to eat some squash too. That's interesting.
A lot of people are probably shaking their heads at that, but that and that goes deeper into just our own personal views on nature and everything. Like it's do no harm. And so besides ticks and mosquitoes, those I'm a little aggressive with, but beyond that, really trying to welcome them. But because of that, with the bad bugs come the good bugs. And so, we get a lot of really beneficial pollinators, animal, insects, all of the things, that's, we want to make a really friendly environment to them as well. So that's really important to us, or to me.
I was thinking of the contrast between my brother and father, who were like plan. My father ended up being a kitchen planner, and my brother was a lawyer. So you could see they loved order and systematic kinds of ways of putting their garden together. And you have called your garden an experiment, and you like to be surprised and even disappointed. I think what they were planning against was disappointment. You were saying, well, maybe disappointment is like any experiment, No, it didn't work. Back to the test tube. In that sort of more eclectic way, in that way of wanting to play in the garden.
Yeah, that's funny. I use that term all the time.
But it's a lot of work. But I think when I've seen you working on it, it's play. Talk about what that feels like. Why is it fun to do all that work in the sun?
Even when it's not, the only thing, I get a little cranky with the mosquitoes, but beyond that, no, I'm lugging bags of soil or bags of rocks, and I'm just as happy as can be. It is play. It is. And so my background being a designer, and being in the creative industry, so much of my creativity has always been to present to clients, following their guidelines, following what they're looking for, what they need. And what happened, I think, with this landscape, it's literally a blank landscape. I came into this blank canvas and realized I can be creative and I don't have to answer to anybody. And I can just create what I truly wanted to create. And there are some limits. We don't have room for like large oak trees, but I am an urban gardener, as it were. So we're on a bit of a postage stamp, but we're cramming as much in as possible. But yeah, so the play is definitely creative play, freedom to just choose what I want to choose and try growing what I want to grow. And again, experimentation. The gardening season starts in January, technically. And I have new practices, which we could get to if we have time, that have really extended the whole gardening season almost year round. I haven't figured out December yet, but January, the catalogs come. And so the designer in me and the creative in me sees these pictures of these amazing plants, beautiful flowers, interesting, unique vegetables, like you name it, the whole thing. And so that's when it starts of like, ooh, which ones don't I have? Which ones can I try?
Yeah.
And it goes into the whole year round. So it really is a sense of just exploration and play and being out there. I usually have my headphones in. I usually have music on, and I'm not thinking. It is a practice that takes my mind off everything else, which is incredible for me because I don't tend to focus well on one thing. So this is something where I am truly focused on, I can't believe this sunflower grew this tall, and look at this and check out the bees and, the birds are eating all the seeds. And like, there's so much to look at, so much to do, but it is all in that realm. And I'm just so happy there. It's just my happy place.
I think that underscores an awful lot of the thinking that Peter Vale and I put in first to the podcast and now the book on practice as a way of being. And I would stress here a way of being, because we only have to be our beingness for X number of years, right? And so it's a treasured thing to be able to be the way we love being, at least for part of the time in a day or a week. Yeah. And that then feeds the other aspects of our being. But I think another particular conjecture was that Peter said that there's more than one practice working in us, for us, and by us. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned a moment ago your creative work, working for clients versus working for yourself, that whole thing. Is there a way you think, Karen, that the other things you do, and you have a job, you're doing digital online work for a great company and a bunch of other stuff. But is there a way that your gardening is sort of the feeder system to the other things that you do very, very well?
I think it's definitely my my moment to reset, to clear my head, to be more creative, and to be more refreshed, and everything else to be able to do my work better. Really, I mean, it's definitely something that does all of those things. It's so gardening in general is healthy. I'm outdoors, I'm moving around, I'm, like breathing fresh air, I'm doing all of those wonderful things. So it's exercise. It's a practice of exercise. But it also is really good for clearing my head out mentally, for seeing new things and looking at things in different ways, just the way the light hits this, new plant that I've never grown before, and look at the tiny leaves and how it's, shaping up to just the general learning that, I'm constantly learning. I'm constantly bettering my craft. I'm constantly becoming more, which then of course doesn't directly feed. I don't talk about gardening at work ever, sadly. But well, that, besides with my coworkers, yeah, so I think the practice is there. I think also there's something to be said. So this is a passion of mine that has, and there's an interesting kind of progression of how this started, of like a passion of gardening, a passion of having these different plants around my house, into taking on a new level of purpose, like incorporating that into the gardening. And that's kind of more of a key thread throughout my work. So I'm a project manager at a social impact creative agency. I'm also starting up this new thing, helping others to run campaigns for causes they care about. Like there's that connection with purpose. And I really think that that's kind of the common thread, but to be able to find purpose in gardening and bring that in was when it kind of leveled up and became such a more important part of my whole being. And when I say that, so just for clarification, because it doesn't always make sense, going from landscaping just because it's pretty to getting into native plants for, beneficial pollinators and all of the wonderful insects and whatnot that are helping our environment and, keeping us healthy and fed. So that's kind of that transition for me.
I had two thoughts, and I was listening, but I always my head just runs around and think, what would you like to ask Karen next? Well, the two things. First, one of your endeavors when we first started to collaborate for Purpose Practice was that you wanted to help young people, teens, women, and maybe boys, to cultivate in themselves before they got out into the college and beyond years a sense of purpose, but particular some kind of a cause that would matter to them, greater than a video game or other things. And my mental image of that you would have for those teens is that you were showing them a way to act like a garden, to start, with a seed of an idea and a feeling around it and nourish it. And as that would grow, then the rest of their character might develop in a different way, as contrasted with them having nothing. So that's I give you that impression, but I also want to secondly circle the word seed, because you said the other day when we were talking, I said, it's a lot of expense out there, Karen, buying all those plants and putting them in. And what did you say?
Yeah, plants are expensive. So I made a bargain with myself this year that I wouldn't buy any plants. I would only use seeds because they're a lot less expensive, but there's also a lot more joy and challenge in growing something from seed. And so yes. I have followed through. It is November and I did not buy one plant this year. I'm very excited.
That is a huge accomplishment. But then you can see I think the arc be when you're helping fellow human beings, particularly young ones, who could basically join a program which essentially installs a point of view, like a scouting program and so forth, and then teaches them some methodologies. But it's nothing they've grown. It's something that they've accepted into their life, contrasted with having a conversation that sparks an idea in that young person, and they go, I've always wondered, or I always wish, or I saw my dad when I was 6XX, and then that starts to grow essentially from the seed of an idea. So that's very cool. But I thought that was funny, and I wanted to mention that because I know my own son and his wife love gardening, and they have used every inch of their postage stamp lot. But they essentially buy their plants. They don't have the patience to watch a seed.
Yeah, it's definitely a different kind of experience in that way. But it's and there's no guarantee. It's also it's definitely, you buy, and it also what's fascinating, especially getting into flowers and plants and whatnot. It often takes a number of years before you even get blooms when you grow something from seeds. So it's a much more, it's a longer process. It's a longer commitment. It's a longer waiting period before you really get to see the, the reward really. But it was more, I think it was more the challenge. But I'll say that. But also, and so this is kind of a, so as I've mentioned, and I'm going to get a little nerdy here, but talking about native plants. So when you go to, especially like the big box stores, and you go to buy plants, they're selling kind of standard plants, but they're not, very, very few of them, if any, are native to your area. So what that means is the pollinators, not that they won't go up to a flower that isn't native, but if it's a native plant, they inherently recognize it. So like butterflies with milkweed, like they recognize milkweed, and that is the only plant that they're going to lay their eggs on, because then when the little caterpillar comes out, it eats the milkweed, and that's how it survives. So when you go to a lot of these big box stores, the flowers they're selling, the plants they're selling aren't native. So that was actually and some of them are even detrimental. Like there's a plant, I think it's barberry. It's actually the host for ticks. Ticks like to lay their eggs. And I have one in my yard. I cut the thing way back when I learned that. I was like, why would they sell that? Why are these big stores selling that? So in order
they don't
to
know. They probably don't know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is all, this is where I kind of went from that passion into purpose, was learning more about native plants and a lot of things that we call weeds, really. And they're actually quite beautiful in their own right. But I had to get a lot of them from seed because they just simply don't sell the plants. So that was another part of why that transition happened. But it's been a really interesting new path to take on and to go out. So I have in my front yard the plants in front of the house, and then I have 2 new beds now of all native flowers and plants, and the difference is staggering. When I go out and look, the plants up by the house, which are all kind of big box store plants, they have, they'll have some bees and whatnot and different, but if you go into the native garden, plants, whatever's currently in bloom, just covered in bees and hoverflies and hornets and wasps and butterflies, they're just covered. And the difference is really, it's really eye-opening. You have to kind of see that for yourself sometimes. So it's a really nice confirmation to know that I'm going in the right direction for nature at the same time that I'm having all the benefits for me of being healthier, being happier. It's such a wonderful relationship. It's such a win-win for everybody.
You mentioned earlier your collaboration with nature. We'll call Mother Nature because I think nature is feminine. And what she is showing you from the front of your house to that spot, to those 2 blocks is, okay, those were man-made plants so much. They're plants, but they were affected by man, the ones close to the house, the box hum. Now, come on down here. 2 things I want to teach you, Karen, says Mother. First, it was a great idea to put these here, and the soil is right for them. The sun is right for them. They really know that this is where they belong. This is their neighborhood. The second thing is that all those other beings that are enjoying the plants and needing them are telling you as well that you're on the right track, that if we can ever, as human beings, figure out how to get that kind of balance and be, in a way, more native human beings, in other words, living more like we really are part of nature, I think there's a lesson there. And the other point that you made, that as I'm looking at the clock here and thinking I really would like to do this for an hour, but let's make this part one. But you made an important point about the seeds and planting the seeds. And that is, you knew that it was going to take maybe even 2 seasons before you got the payoff, the flowering and or the food stuff that comes from it. And knowing that, but also having fun and enjoying garden, it's kind of an interesting fight, isn't it? I can't wait to see XXX grow, but I must wait because it's a seed and it's going to have to take some time. Why didn't I just go down to the store and snap this up, stick it in the ground, and be done with it? So you're living an interesting dance within yourself between patience and pleasure.
Yeah, no, 100%.
The pleasure of patience.
Yeah, 100%. It's, I think the part of it that makes it all work, there's just a nurturing element to it. There's something so beautiful to, and overwhelming, sometimes mind-blowing. So for example, like a sunflower seed, like the ones you eat in the store, like that's the seed for the plant. Tiny little seed goes into the ground or into a bucket, because I start winter sowing. I do my gardening starts in February, March. Goes into a bucket, gets transferred into the ground. I had sunflowers this year over the top of my hand when I raised my arm. So I mean, I didn't measure that. I should have. They're all kind of shrinking and keeled over now. But it blows my mind, again, just so much respect for nature. It blows my mind what something so small can become, and as a source of food for the birds, or us if we get them before the birds, but with sunflowers, it's pretty rare. But yeah, no, there is something just really nurturing and amazing and miraculous to me to start from that seed and to watch something grow into something that is life-sustaining, if it's a vegetable or a plant that we can actually consume, or life-sustaining for other creatures in nature.
It's also a symbol to the Ukrainian people.
Yeah.
And when the war started, and hopefully we haven't forgotten about that, a lot of us sought sunflowers. And by the most weird coincidence, at the point when all that was happening, a friend of mine, Kate Emery, had become a painter after having a long career in developing our nonprofit and our for-profit companies, actually benefit companies. But she started painting, and I went to her studio once, and I put my name into a raffle. And a few months ago, I received a message from her: Dave, you've won the painting. You've won a raffle for painting. I thought, oh, that's great. So we met outdoors, because it was still pandemic-y, and she gave me this small, maybe 6 by 7 kind of framed a sunflower with its leaves out. That turned out to be the painting. Wow. And in fact, it's now on my wall. And I was worried. I didn't want to bring home a big thing, because it was several $100s worth of value. Yeah. It was just right. It was perfect. She handed it to me, and we're in the midst of all of our concerns about what was going on in Ukraine, and there was the sunflower. And I said, Kate, this is the way the universe works, and telling us that there's something hopeful in that flower. And then here you are talking about those flowers coming up and greeting you and saying, "Hey, did you know we were in here when we were under the ground?" Yes, you did, but it could have popped up as something else if you made a wonderful mistake and put a different kind of seed in there, and that would be a great surprise. Well, wow. You are, as I said when I sent you an email, you're the New London gardener. I don't know if New London appreciates it, but
there are a few others. There are a few others. But,
yeah, well, they have these big, elaborate, I'm sure, the English garden stuff and the former estates and everything. If someone drives down your street, and hopefully they can turn their head briefly and look, they're going to think, now there's someone who has a thing going with plants, because they're all over, and then they'll see you out there with your gardening gloves and working like you were last week when we were on a happy hour call, and they'll say, now there is someone I'd like to be.
No, that's very kind. I hope that's what they're thinking. That's lovely, and I hope. Well,
I think that they should be, because you're doing it right, Karen Stevenson. You are doing it right.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Practice Podcast, where we discuss practice with a capital P. If you'd like to hear more, listen in on Spotify, Automatic, and Apple Podcasts, or go to inactionresearch.com/podcast-page. And if you'd like to learn more about social inaction and the nature of practice, head over to inactionresearch.com for more information. Thank you for supporting this show. We look forward to hearing from you soon.
Oh, and one more thing. How could I forget? The book on practice as a way of being is available now in digital form, something that would be new, like podcasting to many of us. And it's a great way of learning more and more about what this podcast presented when Peter Vale and I originated it several years ago. So please come to mylibrary.world/practice, and you'll see what I mean. Thank you.